I know it's crazy, but it's
You're watching Channel Zed, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel, broadcasting live from Studio Zed.
Makes me act the way I do.
Welcome to Zombie History, where we explore the buried past. Hope you're ready to unearth some zombie history with us today. I'm your host, Dr. Mzilikazi and Liz, and I'm here with my co-host, Liz Grumbach. Hey, Liz, how are you doing?
Hey there. I'm doing okay. I'm surviving in the apocalypse. What about you?
I'm fine, but I'm feeling a little zombified by the clock, you know, this time
Same.
switch. It's making me really question about the reality of time and space as we know it.
I know. Well, time, I think we all know that time is an illusion, but daylight savings time always reminds us. We're actually joining y'all for Zombie History today at a new time for us. We will return to our regularly scheduled time next week. Here, where most of our studio folks are located in Arizona, we actually don't do daylight savings time. So if you're zombified by daylight savings time, maybe come chat with us on at Zombified Media on Twitter. We're having a conversation there, and I've kind of been, they let me take over the account again. They let me zombify the account every once in a while to talk about things like this. So if anyone's interested, come chat with us. But hey, Mzilikazi, we have had this amazing 3-episode arc for the launch of Zombie History this semester. We've been exploring the buried past. I feel like we've come from West Africa to the Caribbean, and now we're ending in America. What undead stories are we focusing on today?
That's right. That's right. So, of course, and in America, in this context, we're referencing the United States, though often we discuss America as though, it was the whole of the Americas, but we're focusing in on our context here within the United States here, and really following through on this story line, and to really explore where we are, where the vast majority of us are tuning in from this country and cultural context. So how do we then explore these threads of resistance into the current day? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think highlighting the current political discourse, what's being discussed around race, discussions and discourse about what kind of books we ought to be reading in schools and what kind of history lessons are appropriate for our children to learn. And it really highlights something that's pretty consistent in American politics and culture, the kind of pendulum swing from one side to the next, right? If you will all recall the movement for racial justice and the uprisings around Black Lives Matter organizing last summer, and the push for racial justice and the push for accountability on the parts of cities, states, and police departments, and the pendulum swing to the other side of that. And we have to ask ourselves, what laws and what policies have come out of that organizing, right? What are the long-lasting effects of the organizing, not only in the political realm, but in terms of grassroots organizing? So these things remain really important, and especially considering the debates today around critical race theory and whether or not to teach more full and accurate histories in our classrooms in general. And of course, the kind of what I call a sort of racialized panic about what kinds of lessons are being taught or not being taught really in our classrooms. So these things remain relevant for us to come back to this question of resistance, right? In light of what it means to be zombified, as we've explored it here on Zombie History, the zombification through the experience of the transatlantic slave trade, the zombification through the experience of taking away people's language, and cultural practices, and the resistance to those efforts to zombify that, the resistance through maintaining linguistic practices, cultural practices, musical practices. And what we'll get into today is exploring practices of letter writing and really thinking through how do we add it to this understanding of what it means to be a little resistant to being zombified. Oh, can't hear you, Liz.
Also, zombified by the mute button today. Every time I hear you talk about this, I remember our kind of initial conversations when we were talking about launching zombie history, right? How we really wanted to ground the conversation in unearthing these buried pasts. And I've used your pendulum swing from progress to progress multiple times over the past couple of months. But too, we wanted to ground this in healing and resistance. And so I wonder if there are any examples of healing and resistance that you have found over the past couple of years that have been meaningful to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. The question of healing is central. And thanks for bringing that back, Liz, because it's not just about unearthing the miseries or unearthing the traumas, right? What's beyond the trauma is the spaces that we cultivate for ourselves in order to heal. So things that I've seen in the last few years, one thing which you can check out online, you can check out on Twitter, would be the Nap Ministry. The Nap Ministry as a space created by a Black woman to really be emphasizing the role of rest, truly napping, the role of rest and sleep, and resisting this pressure to like go. The resisting this kind of pressure set on by capitalist ideas of production, right? This idea that you're only useful if you're making something or being producing something, and really saying that's not right. Like, that your resistance and your rest is central to your own survival, and not just so that you can get up and work another day, right? The Nap Ministry teaches that rest for rest's sake. Rest for rest's sake, not just so you can go back and work another day. So I think that's really central and become a larger part of our language in the community about rest and resistance.
I love that so much. And I just have to bring up, this is one of my favorite kind of quotes from the Nap Ministry. I will never grind my body to exhaustion for a capitalist system that still owes a debt to my ancestors. I refuse. And kind of it highlights really the power in refusal and how that can be connected to rest, which I just find is so thank you. I think that's such a powerful example of what healing and resistance look like and can look like today. I appreciate you as always.
Oh, likewise, Liz.
So I know that, today's episode really is about resistance and healing in community, I think, right? So maybe, thinking about what spaces of self-care look like in community is maybe what today's topic is. So I wonder if now is a good time to bring on our guest.
Yeah, I think it'd be an amazing time to bring on our guest, who we are all really excited to have with us today. Our guest today is Dr. Desiree Melonas, who's an expert in political science and Black studies from Birmingham Southern College. One of her recent published works is on Black women's healing and radical self-care through apostolary work. Okay. We're really pleased to have Desiree with us. It's so good to see you again, Desiree. Hi.
Oh, it is so good to see you, to be seen.
That's right.
It's been a while since we've seen each other.
It's nice, and it's nice to, we last saw each other at the National Conference for Black Political Scientists. So check out INCOS. Yes. You can also find them online. And we were on an amazing panel together. So it's really wonderful to be in this space with you again. How are you doing today?
I am good. I think that I'm going to need to partake in the Nap Ministry later on today, but I'm in good spirits. I'm rounding the bend on my semester, and I'm good.
Good.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm well. I hear you on the Nap Ministry and really needing to partake in that, and also to share that wisdom with one another about really just take a nap, just for nap's sake. So
just take a nap.
That's right.
I will say that I in my adult years I've tried to tell myself, I don't need naps. No, but even when I was younger, one of the first things that I would do, my mom reminds me of this, when I was in preschool, after half a day, I would not talk to her. I would not talk to anyone, and I would go and nap for like 2 hours. And so even then, it's like my little body recognized that I just needed like a reprieve. I needed to extricate myself from the talking and the stimulation and just be before I could be with others again. So yes.
I mean, man, not to please. But what's so interesting is that we have some things happening in the comments here about like sleep and rest. And I just like have to bring them in because like this idea that like sleep deprivation turns us into zombies, right? Like this work, go, hustle culture can do that. And then, you know, there's some kind of argument, but the more we sleep, the more we resemble zombies, right? Depending, I think, like why you're sleeping is really important. So like watch out for your health and your mental health, y'all. But I do think that, you know, this kind of survival and balance and like finding out where we are as people. So I just had to bring in these comments because like, thank y'all. Keep commenting. I'm learning stuff from you guys. But I'll turn it back over to the conversation today. I know we have maybe a couple of questions for Dr. Melonas.
Well, let's start here with thinking and referencing to this article that you've written here and ask you about letter writing. So how is letter writing, especially between Black women, as you say in your article, a way to sustain community, bestow care, and bear witness?
Yes. I should start by saying, just to give some background into the piece, like why I decided to do this and at this time. It is a way to honor too my grandmother and my mother. So one of the first reasons why I decided to write this piece was because the pandemic had started and I felt super alienated and, you know, disparate. And I was trying to conceive of a way to maintain the kind of thick relationships with people. Like all of my folks, all of my people, they live in Pittsburgh with the exception of a brother who lives in LA. And so I'm like, oh my goodness, how do I keep the sinews like really thick between us and to not feel so fractured? And I started to do engage in a practice that was very familiar to me, in part because of my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother, I bet if I were to look in any of the drawers in my office here, I could rip out a card or a letter from my grandmother. And they would always be just unannounced. And it always felt like it was the right time. It like pierced my space in a way that it always felt as if it was so necessary. And my mother as well, just checking up on you, just making sure that you know that you are loved and that you're cared for. And I think that these are the kinds of messages and practices that really benefit Black women. You know, Audrey Lorde, who is a Black feminist thinker, says that, I mean, and this is a kind of ripping off of her idea, she says that, you know, Black women, Black people in general, but Black women exist in a space, in an environment, in a society in which we were not meant to survive. And so we're sort of getting these kinds of messages constantly that we are not meant to survive. So Black women engaging in life-affirming practices is really vital, I think, to us. And I conceive of letter writing as one such way of doing that. And it's not necessarily the content, but sometimes I would just open up the mailbox or my little college, you know, when you're in college, you have like those little mailboxes. And so I would peek inside and see a writing, a penmanship that is so distinctly my mother's and my grandmother's. And it would like all of a sudden put my body at ease, just knowing that I was thought of. And then I would walk and I would read. And so I think that this is really important for us to participate in these kinds of things that affirm us, but also not just the receiving of it as life affirming, but also the giving over, the composing letters as a way to, you know, bolster, to affirm others, which then, you know, builds up our communities, the communities in which we are a part. It gives them life. It breathes life into others, which I think is then, you know, given back to us.
That's right.
Yeah,
and I can see that both in the as you know, right, the action of creating the letter, but the process of receiving a letter, and especially as you note that in relation to your own mother and your own grandmother. I wonder if we could think, or if you could help us think, if we could take this out, because of course the familial is so important here, and then I think the next step might be the kind of the community, and thinking through What kinds of spaces and strategies does letter writing give us to help sustain our communities and our community movements now? And can they help us envision a different future?
Yes, yes. So one of the things that I say in my piece, and I really do believe this to be true, and I should back up and say the kind of letter that I have in mind is like a kind of romanticized letter writing where you have like your pen and your paper and you're sitting down and it's a kind of event. And I know that not everyone has the luxury to do that, but to the extent that we can, like really sitting down and being with what we are trying to be with. And it slows us down because it is an event. We have to gather our paper, we have to gather our pen, and we have to be with our thoughts because we're writing. We may have to scratch something out, so we really want to consider what we're trying to say. And that sort of reflective activity, that presence, I say it's a way of resisting, as you were saying at the beginning in your opening remarks, it's a way of resisting this sort of capitalist neoliberal impulse to work, and go, and to produce more. But instead, we're saying, no, I'm going to excavate some room in my day to do this, to be for somebody else, knowing that or believing that they might be able to benefit from what I have to offer. And so it's the slowing down, it's this like militating against the neoliberal capitalistic impulse to go, which I think is really important, not only for communities of people, but if we're thinking about Black women in particular, which my paper does focus on. We know that Black women, historically speaking, have been cast as these people who can sort of work incessantly and in inhuman sort of ways, and we are to sort of just farm out our time to others, and our bodies used as a means to do that. And so it is an enunciation. I think the very sitting down to write is an enunciation that one is in rejection of that. Like, I'm going to reject that. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to be with this practice. And just commit to slowness.
Go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to bring in really quickly this comment from Athena, who is safe. So still, Athena, thank you. We're so glad to hear from you, always on stream. We're glad you escaped the zombies. But in the age of email, writing a letter feels like a lot more work and money, right? But is that part of the point, that it feels more intimate and valuable, right?
Indeed. And to go back to why I started, it did, because, I could have at the beginning of the pandemic, and I certainly still do, I could pick up the phone to call family members and friends. I could text them, I could send an email, but there is something intimate. And I think that it signals something. Like when you receive a letter, I think that it signals implicitly, even if you're not sort of like, if it's not totally registering for you, I think it does signal that, someone they really, really thought about me today. They got this letter together, they put a stamp on it, they went to the post office. And so it's a way of conveying a sense that someone is consumed by you to the point that they decided to go ahead and gather all these materials, perform this act, and let you know by way of a letter. And I think that that's the intimacy of it. I mean, and also I think it's kind of cool as well to see someone's penmanship, right? That you see how they are writing when they're delivering their thoughts to you. I don't know.
It's truly beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's causing all sorts of threads here. From the slowdown, what it takes to slow down to write the letter. And again, I'm still thinking about this lens of like both healing and resistance. And
yes.
For better or worse, my mind took me back into eras of slavery and the ways in which slowing down labor also acted as resistance, right? To slow down this forced press of intensity to purposefully slow down the line, right? As an act of resistance. And even in light, what's particular about Black women in light of the United States of America as a nation, in light of our first and earliest experiences as Black women, and for those who were enslaved, really thinking through, the ways that it was made illegal to teach these folks how to read and write by law, punishable
Yes.
as crimes punished. So well, I'm taking these things in light to think about what does it mean today, or even a generation ago, for Black women in particular to be writing letters in light of the effort to slow down, right? The effort
Yes.
to, and in this note, it's this of slow down for an effective connection, to
Yes.
be
Yes.
connected and remain connected, to create community and maintain community.
Yes, yes. To slow down, to be connected, but also to remind oneself of one's need to slow down. Like, and so I think of it as praxis. Like, so in the act, you're being reminded of the very fact that we do need to sort of sever ourselves sometimes from the responsibilities that may grind us down, that may abrade us. And so I think that in the act of writing itself, we might be reminded, like, oh yeah, that felt good to actually just sit in my chair and to think and just be away for a moment. But to your point, that this is like the practice of slowing down is not new for Black people and for Black women. That's one of the things that I mentioned in my paper, that not only did I sort of reach for something and want to talk and analyze something that is familiar to me because of my connection to my mother and my grandmother, my connection through my mother and my grandmother, but because I would call it an indigenous practice for all the reasons that you lay out, that yes, Black slaves were known to sort of slow down labor, to break things in order to slow down the laboring process, to prevent or to preclude or to block capital from being accumulated, right? So I think that there's that. And actually, I was thinking this morning, so I just got finished reading this is not my first time I read it. I got finished teaching Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs, who, the pseudonym that she uses, and this is Linda Brent. But there's the practice of letter writing laced throughout this. One of the ways that she uses letter writing is not actually to connect to like kin. Well, she does do that, but this example is not, she doesn't use it to connect to kin and other friends, but she actually uses it to slow down her pursuer. So she emails, oh my God, she writes a letter to a family member saying that she's somewhere else where she's not actually, as a way to throw off the scent of her pursuer, who is our former slave owner, Dr. Flint. And so that actually, her sitting down to write a letter actually slowed down her pursuit and prevented her from, being caught at the time.
Wow.
And so there are all kinds of ways. Of course, letters among slaves were used to, disseminate information. I think the very act of letter writing is an enunciation of one's humanity that one could write, right? But in this instance, it was a way to slow down her pursuers, to thwart, to be subversive, right? Yes, almost like letter writing is anti-industrial. Yes, indeed, it is yes, I agree with that, Pamela.
Wow, that's powerful. That's really powerful.
That was so powerful. And we have a bunch of comments that are kind of talking about, I think, the zombification of, gig workers, right? And how letter writing is anti-industrial. And I think, this idea that letter writing gives us something, it gives us a place to put our thoughts, that it could be a technique for treating anxiety, that you could throw it away, and Pam says, or you could burn it. Be careful if you burn a letter, please, but please, like, burn it. And so, and I think I just wanted to bring those in as kind of maybe a transition to, how is this slowdown? How is this slowdown going to help us heal, or does it help us heal? Right? Maybe turning to, there are all these forces of zombification now. And I think, maybe in your article, you talk a little bit about how Audrey Lorde and Pat Parker have these techniques for this, right? So I wonder if we could maybe talk about that a little bit, and maybe who Audrey Lorde and Pat Parker are.
Yes. So maybe I should work my way backwards, starting first with who Audrey Lorde and Pat Parker are. Audrey Lorde is I'm sure that she is more well known. She's a Black feminist thinker who wrote lots of prose and poetry. She's probably most well known, I'm sure, for her prose more so than her poetry. And Pat Parker is a beautiful, beautiful poet who wrote some like just rich and acerbic poetry. I'm sure that she would also consider herself a Black feminist thinker as well. And they became friends at a point. Audrey Lorde is Pat Parker's senior, and that sort of comes through in their letters. But they started writing letters together, I want to say in 1974, after having this really amazing coming together. You know how sometimes, or at least this is how I read the biography describing this moment, this transcendental coming together of two people. You know, like sometimes you just meet a person and you're like, yep. Like it's ineffable. And that's how I read this moment where they met one another. And so after having met, they started writing letters to one another. The letters, at least as I have read them, it's compiled into a book called Sister Love, edited by Julie Inzer with an introduction by Mecca Jamila Sullivan. And it's an archive of the letters that they wrote to one another, beginning once again from in 1974 and ending in 1988, which is, I want to say, a year before Pat Parker died and 4 years before Audrey Lorde died. They both incidentally succumbed to cancer and had bouts with it. Audrey Lorde had multiple bouts of cancer, and Pat Parker had cancer as well. So they sort of commiserated over that and shared their frustrations and despair and sadness over their cancer, among other things. Their letters are just, I should say also that they're not like, they weren't writing like letters every week to one another or even monthly, but they're just like these pop-ins. And they're so gentle and generous with one another. Like, if one didn't respond after months and months, it's like, that friend that you have, if you haven't responded to their text message and they're like, oh, it's okay. That's how I read this. After months and months would pass by, they would say, maybe you missed my letter, or like, maybe you misplaced my letter. So there was just like such sweet generosity and tenderness with one another, which was also laced with like a kind of critical care that looked like pushing each other too sometimes. Like Audrey Lorde would often push Parker to make sure that she capitalized on opportunities. She pushed her as well to take care of herself and to stay in a sort of creative energy. She said, the body needs to create as well. So I could talk a lot about this, and so I lost the thread, your question, because I started, riffing on Sister Love. But it is just such a beautiful compilation of letters where they engage, like in real time, in feminist praxis of care, of concern, of what I would call waymaking, and in love. They would often refer to each other as sister love, which is, where the title Sister Love comes from.
Wow, that's beautiful. And to hear about it in that, in their example, and also to share the text for everyone on this, checking this out, to check out this text as well. And I'll bring it back to the question that Liz was posing that will help ground our ending here, is about whether or not this slowdown will help us heal, or what are some ways we can heal together in this capitalist and neoliberal society? What are ways that you see us taking on healing?
And I had to pop back in and just say, I heard you say these words, friendship, right, and generosity, and like maybe that's part of the roadmap.
Yes, I do think it's a part of the roadmap. And to go back to slowness, and what, writing, and it's not, letter writing, of course, is not the only way to commit to a practice of slowness. I put it forward as an offering. It's one of the ways that we can slow down. I think that what this this work of mine, I think what it helps in the context of radical self-care, which I want to speak about because I think that it will loop us back to like communal practices of healing. Radical self-care, we should say self-care, I think has been co-opted to mean that it's just like, I just take care of myself. It's all about myself. It is all about the individual. To the extent that I get my nails done and my hair, which is fine. And I just focus on me and totally, put blinders around the world around me. That is self-care. We can call that self-care. But thinkers who talk about radical self-care conceive of it as self-care that is always situated within the context of the community, or it's a kind of self-care that has in mind the community as a necessary background condition. And what I mean by that is that we commit to self-care so that we can then give back and engage, participate in our communities with our whole selves. Like, it is really difficult to be a part of creating new visions for the world, of imagining new possibilities for the future, if we ourselves are being abraded and we don't take time to minister to our whole self, to our physical body, to our minds, to our spirits. And I think of letter writing as one such way of doing that, where you step back so that you can enter with both feet on the ground and be and minister to your community with your whole self. And that is borrowed, by the way, this idea of giving back or being with our communities with our whole selves. And that is the nature of radical self-care. That's sort of borrowed from Angela Davis, who says, it took her a while to come to the idea, to recognize that self-care is really important, because she was also going at a speed that was just not sustainable. And so, she has a yoga and contemplative practice, and it was for that reason, because of her acknowledging that we need each other. And in order for us to be a part of that, I need to consider how I take care of me, so that I can, be a part of this work that is really necessary.
That's right. As you were saying that, before you mentioned Sister Angela Davis, that's who came to mind. And seeing her say that, right, that self-care is a radical act, and to really ground ourselves in that, and to move beyond the co-opted, commercialized version of self-care. I mean, do that too, but move beyond and for more, right? Do it with another lens that's attentive to the kind of critical community care. Right. That right. And that sense that you can't care for others if you can't care for yourself, So thank you for grounding us with that. And I think that's an excellent way for us to really acknowledge the full circle with these Arc of Zombie History episodes, where we've come to think through resistance and healing and self-care. And that these things are really, that resistance and care are truly two sides of the same coin. Right, that you need to be able to, but even Bob Marley sings to this, right? You got to run away to be able to fight another day, right?
Yes.
So really? Truly, right?
Yes, I mean, it does. It seems so basic, right? But I often find myself just not caring, and like, giving of myself, and then I have to sit myself down. I'm like, you're not going to be able to keep going like this. And so it seems basic, but I think it is, like, it's a profound insight that we need to just constantly have on repeat. We need to be recycling that.
That's right.
And sharing that, that wisdom with other people.
That's right. What they say, each one teach one, everyone out there, each one teach one, and share the knowledge and the word about rest and radical self-care. So I'd really like to thank you, Dr. Desiree Melonas. It's lovely to see you again and to be in this space together, of course, along my side, Liz. Thank you both. It's really so lovely to come around and have this conversation and really be thinking about this lens of healing and care and radical self-care. I'd like to thank you all for being here. And really, we'll see you next. You want to add, Liz?
I just wanted to just express gratitude again. So Dr. Malones, Desiree, thank you so much for being here. I feel like I'm going to come away from this and think about all of the ways in which I can slow down right? Whether it's letter writing or connecting with community or seeing what I can do for my community as radical self-care. I think your definition of it was just so impactful. So thank you for being here. And we will hopefully see you back on Zombie History soon, or in another community.
The invite stands. The invite stands.
Cool.
And really, thank you everyone for being here and being on this alongside us. Really, most importantly, and until the next time we meet each other, don't be a zombie. Know your history. We'll see you next time, everyone.
It's crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something supernatural with you.